Welcome to our info session on nutrition in complex care. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, Belongside Families would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. My name is Kelly and I'm joining you from the land of the Darug people, and I welcome you to share the name of your country that you're from in the chat. Today we will hear from Ashley Mitchell. Ash is an accredited practicing dietitian and specialist in paediatric nutrition for infants, children and adolescents. Ash has over 14 years of experience at leading children's hospitals. She brings deep expertise in feeding challenges, tube feeding and complex diets. Today's session will cover what a paediatric dietitian does and how they support children with feeding and nutrition needs, what to expect during a typical dietitian appointment, how to prepare for appointments and what to bring, and we'll give practical evidence-based tips to support your child's nutrition at home. So without further ado, hi Ash, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
You're welcome. And I'm happy to hand over to you for our nutrition in complex care, which we've been very excited about.
Beautiful. All right, well, let's get started. So just to kick off today, I know Kelly's already given a little bit of background, so we'll just skip over our outline slide, but basically we're going to cover why nutrition is important and give some practical tips around how a dietitian can help your child. And so we've already heard a little bit about my bio as well. I think one of the key things to know is that while I have that extensive paediatric hospital experience, it's allowed me to work in a variety of complex nutrition areas, including a general paediatrics clinic, as well as really complex areas such as inborn errors of metabolism, and having quite a broad range in disability, neurology, gut health, ADHD, and it's allowed me to make contributions to feeding guidelines and present in a lot of different spheres, including internationally. But I think more importantly is that I am a mum of two. So I get the juggle. I know what it's like to balance all the requirements of a family and all the things our kids need to do, as well as trying to prioritize their nutrition and wellness in that, which is really challenging. So I like to combine the evidence-based experience as a pediatric dietitian with my mum life experience, so that I can really understand the families that I work with, their day-to-day, and how we can develop strategies that meet their needs to support their child. So why is nutrition important? I think poor nutritional status, we have a lot of research that it is linked to a variety of different things and how it impacts our lives and our kids' lives. So there is increase in fatigue, usually reduced participation in other therapies or exercise. Kids are likely to have more days in bed because of illness and can miss school. There's more appointments and doctor visits and respiratory illnesses if nutrition status is poor, and less social outings, so activities with friends, as well as nutritional deficiencies and the consequences of that we can prevent through nutrition. And that brings us to what does a dietitian do to prevent those things and improve nutritional status? So always, first and foremost, is we want to understand if the child is getting enough and ensure nutritional adequacy as our step one. And that can be really complex. So part of the initial assessment is we'll do a growth and nutrition assessment to understand energy, protein, all the vitamins and minerals, as well as hydration, and really understand if the child is growing the way that they would be expected to do that. So as part of the growth assessment, we'll need a series of measurements. So when coming to an appointment, it's really important to bring any measurements that you may have. Even bringing the blue book from when the child was a baby can be quite helpful. And so weighing and measuring looks different for everyone. We might use baby scales or standing scales, chair scales or wheelchair scales. And we may use height measures differently, depending if we're lying down and doing a lying length or a standing length. We may do segmental length if a child is wheelchair bound. And so basically that's measuring different segments of the body and calculating out an estimated height. And once we have this information, then we will plot them on a growth chart, which I've put an example here. And you can see the top section is height. The little red dots with the highlighted line just shows the trajectory of their height. And then that's fairly consistent throughout their life because it's over from the ages from 2 to about 13 or 14. So that's sort of the expected growth that we would be expecting their heights to continue on. You can see with their weight, when plotting the series of measurements, there's been a little bit of a taper around 11 for a couple of years, and we've had to put in place a lot of nutrition strategies to boost their energy and bring them back up to how they would be expected to grow. So we'll get to those strategies as we go through, but understanding how a child has grown previously informs our decisions and goals and understanding if they're getting enough overall energy now. We may also do other assessments. For example, in a wheelchair, a child may have altered muscle mass and bone density, which impacts the accuracy of their weight. So we might look at other things such as tricep skin folds, which is this picture here, which can assist us in working out fat stores and nutritional adequacy. And then it brings us to the nutrition side of things. And so we want to understand what the child eats or is fed with a feeding tube. So we'll ask the family, what does a typical day look like? We may do a detailed dietary analysis with a 3-day food record. So it's writing down everything the child has for 3 days, or writing down the feeding that's been tolerated with a feeding tube, and then we'll analyze it down to the micronutrient. So what I mean by that is this little graph here. We look at everything that we can, working out estimating what's being consumed, and it compares the nutrients to the recommended amount for their age. It helps us identify what gaps we might need to be filling. And so it can be a really useful assessment tool. It can also be very reassuring. So if we know that the child is getting what they need, even if their diet may be limited, then it can just help us to understand that and be okay with it. I think it's also important to consider pathology results as well. So sometimes we might need to order blood tests if we're concerned about certain nutrients, because that is really our best outcome measure, is understanding what's actually absorbed and in the blood. But we can't test for everything, and a blood test is not suitable for every child. So that just depends on the situation. And we may also look at what supplements they're already taking and add that to our assessment in the diary form, and working out if that's contributing enough to get us over the line with enough nutrition. So once we've identified our nutrition sections that need to be filled up, so we've got energy, which is all the types of energy, so essential fatty acids, carbohydrates, looking at protein, as well as vitamins and minerals. Then we go, hey, how do we translate that into food or feeds, or blenderized feeds, if that's what we're up to, as well as looking at fiber and fluid. And so I've just put this slide in to make it more practical in terms of what nutrition is in each food group and leading us to the food strategies. So our grain section here provides us with energy, fiber and B vitamins. If we know, hey, iron is a bit low, then maybe we need to be looking at our protein group or using some fortified grain products, and looking at this food group here just depending on what nutrient is missing. So I won't go into it too much, but it's just to illustrate that each food group provides us with different nutrients. Another standout is our dairy food group, so milk, yogurt, and cheese, and this is our key contributor for bone health minerals such as calcium. And so once we know what the child likes and what they may be eating already, what needs topping up, and then we work out where we go next in terms of nutritional adequacy. But before we do any of that, understanding the child's why behind their feeding challenge is incredibly important to supporting them. If we don't understand the why, then feeding can continue to be problematic if we're not sort of addressing the cause behind it. And the why looks different for everybody. So that's another reason why it's important to bring not only growth information, but any reports that you might have for the child, such as pediatrician reports or letters from their GP, other allied health team members, like a speech pathologist, for example. That can just help inform our assessment and understand the why. And so if a child's nutrition status needs support, we want to work out if, okay, are there medical factors contributing to this? Is it a tolerance issue? So maybe they're not tolerating their tube feeds, and we need to understand how we can support tolerance better. Are they constipated, and so they're just not as hungry as we would expect them to be and not eating enough? And we want to understand feeding history. So the journey early on can help us identify if there's any contributing factors. For example, were they struggling with chewing and swallowing skills? And maybe we need a speech pathologist to support feeding to help us get enough nutrition in. And then we might work closely with them. Is the cause selective eating? And we'll talk a bit more about sensory and picky eating a little bit further in this and some strategies around that, because that is something I do see and support a lot. And understanding why they might be selective is really important too. And we want to understand where the child's up to developmentally, and I'll make sure we're offering foods that are developmentally appropriate for their feeding skills. We often lean on our other multidisciplinary team members. So thinking psych, OT, physio for positioning, and speech for chewing and swallowing, as well as our pediatricians and medical staff. Then it brings us to the how. So how do we fill these nutritional gaps? We've found them, we understand what's contributing to them. What do we do next? And I think I always like it to start with preferred foods because usually that's the easiest way and the most supportive way to get to nutritional adequacy as a starting point. And then we can look at expanding food preferences or other range. So are there any foods already in the diet that the child likes or tolerates that can be increased to fill the nutritional gaps? Or are there similar foods that can be swapped? And what that looks like is a practical example here. If the child comes in and they're eating white bread or having white bread blended into their blenderized feeds, then this particular brand has 2 grams of fiber with no added vitamins or minerals. If we're trying to increase fiber in their diet or increase some vitamins and minerals, for example, iron, then switching to an iron fortified bread. You can see here we've increased the fiber, we tripled it, and we've also provided 5 milligrams of iron, which for a child, that's a significant proportion of their requirements. And while our blood is the best measure to understand if that's all being absorbed, it's a really good top up. When you think about the differences in these breads, they're pretty similar. So they're both white bread, they're both similar texture, a little bit different in terms of the shape and size of the slice, but it's a pretty similar swap. So for a lot of selective eaters I may see, usually this one can get us to be accepted because it's not like we're asking them to consume a totally different food, but that is very individualized for the child. If we need to fill gaps by topping up energy and protein, I like to use a philosophy called making every bite count. And what I mean by that is adding extra protein or fat. So foods that are higher in fat, for example, would be oil, margarine, butter, avocado, dips. Adding that to the food that the child's already eating without increasing the bulk. So here is an example. We have 2 scrambled eggs. So the eggs on their own, they contribute 160 calories just for 2 eggs. And then if we go and add 1 tablespoon of grated cheese and 1 tablespoon of margarine, we've over doubled the calories without asking the child or expecting them to eat a much bigger quantity. It's still roughly the same size of eggs, all those things melt in, but we've boosted the energy to help them meet their energy needs for growth. And we'll be considering this in conjunction with the child's whole day, as well as their vitamins and minerals, and making sure everything is adequate overall. But it's surprising how much this can add up when it's applied for the whole day. It's a little bit of a juggle too between what the child will accept and tolerate. So if we go too much, then sometimes they don't eat all of it, which then it backfires a little bit. So everything is trial and error and working with practical strategies to individualize it to the child's tastes. What if we need to top up vitamins and minerals? And that can be really overwhelming. I quite often find myself, once I've analysed a food diary, going to the chemist and looking at the backs of the products that are available to find exactly what I want to fill the gaps, because the products are so variable, and it's important to understand that they're not all the same in their composition, and quite often advertising is a little bit cheeky. For example, there might be a fussy eater vitamin that is not very high in key nutrients that kids actually need quite often when they're selective. So having it personalized for the child is important. We want to make sure it's filling the correct gaps, and that's where the food diary can come in handy, working out what needs to be filled, and then we find the product for them. And I think it's important to know that if we're just choosing random supplements, then we might be missing out on the correct vitamins, but also at risk of toxicity. So some vitamins and minerals, they do provide excess of things that are accumulated in the body, such as fat-soluble vitamins, or iron is another one. So we want to make sure that we're giving the right amount, not over or under what is required for the child. And I sometimes see if we're giving multiple supplements, then if they contain the same ingredient in a couple of them, it's really easy to overdo it, and just something to be mindful of. Then that brings us to our liquid drinks. So oral nutrition supplements are usually milky-based products. There's some pictures down the bottom there. They often have vitamins and minerals as well as energy and protein. And so that's if we say for the child, if they have poor appetite, or maybe they're eating less overall and we need to top up energy and not just vitamins and minerals, where you might use standard multivitamin, then we'd be looking at these types of products here. There is a very big range from powdered forms to the liquids. And I find sometimes if kids are particularly sensory or selective, then the liquid forms can be easier to introduce, because they deliver a consistent experience every time. Whereas the powders, they can be a little bit granular, they can be made to different concentrations and be a little bit different. And so that's where it can be experimenting and working out what the child will accept the most. There are some juice-based products. There's not as many, most are milky, but they are also options as well. And I think the key thing is that it's all about individualization and creativity. Sometimes we'll use our powdered products in recipes. So these products like Add Vital Neutral or Ensure Neutral, they are really great to be mixing into, say, savory foods, because while they're milky, they don't have that really sweet taste. And you can also use them in baking. You can use the flavored ones in baking as well. So for example, you might mix it into a banana bread or something like that to just boost the energy and vitamins and minerals within that food. And then we may look at tube feeding. And I think that's something that is really important to consider with the multidisciplinary team. So it's individual and can be a difficult decision for families. I think when we're thinking about it, we need to be talking to our pediatricians and understanding where the child's at with their feeding skills and development. We may have tried a lot of the strategies orally to meet their needs and then gone, hey, we really need to top up with a feeding tube. And I think with working with families around that decision over so many years, it can be a big relief. And I've had a number of them say, why didn't we do this earlier? So I think everyone's journey is different, but it sometimes comes a point where we do need a feeding tube. And they can come in a variety of different forms. So nasogastric tubes are from the nose to the tummy. They may be a gastrostomy, which is when there's an insertion point into the stomach directly. So nothing visible on the face, it's just straight into the stomach. Or there may be a jejunostomy, which is when the tube is in the intestines. So feeding tubes, they can be permanent or they can be temporary. And I think if you're interested in more information around that or tube weaning, then visiting my website at Nourish Paediatrics, there's a blog post about tube weaning that can give some more information and direct to some really useful resources such as the Blend magazine. And so we also think about things like formula feeds versus blenderized feeds. And I think to be clear, blenderized feeds are when we're using food and blending it up and putting it through a feeding tube. So when I first started out, I think it was not very common. We might see the odd child that wanted to go down that path. But there has been more research around it, and there's been, I suppose, benefits in children around gastrointestinal symptoms such as gagging or retching, vomiting, nausea, constipation. And so I think therefore blended diets have really increased in their acceptance and use. So I'm definitely seeing a lot more families wanting to investigate that option. And it's again really individualized. I think it's important to note that a blenderized feed can only go into a gastrostomy tube, rather than straight into the intestines or via a nasogastric tube. So that's just a consideration. So we have some formula examples here. I think we have options of commercial formulas. So these are ready-made. Usually their protein source and energy is based around milk, but there are other options. They can be varying in their fiber composition, and I think research has also showed that usually there's lower fiber intakes on tube feeds when we're using commercial formulas than possibly what is recommended. And we'll come to that in a moment. But I think that's led to the development of hybrid formulas. And so what I mean by that is basically a commercial formula where they may have added some other food ingredients. Whereas this one, Complete Paediatrics, has things like chicken or vegetables as well as our milk-based protein. And then we have a homemade blenderized feed. And so this is me many years ago, trying to work out how to get the right consistency to blend and run through the tube smoothly without causing a tube blockage. And it's always a bit of a balance between balancing the nutrition in a blenderized feed, I should say. So making sure we're getting everything from that chart that I showed earlier, and having it in a consistency that can go through the feeding tube. And so I've written gut health here just to lead us on to fiber, because as I mentioned, the commercial formulas are often a little bit lower in fiber and we may need to add to it. So fiber is, they're carbohydrates that are unable to be digested in the small intestine. So they're often found in foods like fruits and vegetables and whole grains, nuts and seeds. and sort of if you think of your plant-based foods. And I think there's so much out there on social media around gut health. I've written buzz term because it's not really a term that we use much in scientific literature. But it's this modern idea that basically there's not a real definition for it, but it's the absence of gut symptoms. So it feels like there's more well-being if we're not having abdominal pain or diarrhea. So I think to bring it back to, well, I think understanding that that's when people are talking about gut health, that is often what is meant. But in terms of what I think about as a dietitian is in regard to the gut microbiome. And that's quite often the science-based approach. And so when we're thinking about the microbiome, it's the bacteria or other microorganisms in the gut. So they help us to break down food, turning it into nutrients that the body can use. And it has large impacts across our well-being. So, for example, it can help with immunity, gastrointestinal, heart, overall physical and mental health. We have a thing called the gut-brain axis, and it's basically like the brain and the gut can talk to each other in multi-directionals. So the way our gut is feeling can impact our brain and vice versa. And that's where the importance of the gut microbiome has come to light. And there are many factors that impact the balance. For example, the food we eat. And what does this mean in terms of food or feeds? We like to think about the fiber, which exists in many different types and forms, and it can act as a bulking agent, so helping things move through the gut, but also as a prebiotic, which feeds the gut microbiome, so the healthy gut bacteria. It's found mainly in plant foods. And this is often the hardest thing with kids, particularly if they're a bit selective. Fruit and vegetables, they don't deliver a same predictable experience. They can be so variable in their type. If you think of a pear, you bite into it, the ripeness is going to impact the texture, the taste. There's so many things about it that's variable, which can be challenging for kids. We may need to look at fiber supplements to support their microbiome or gut health. And then probiotics have also increased significantly in their popularity. And so probiotics, they are live microorganisms that have a proven health benefit. And so they're found in foods, mainly fermented foods. So if you're thinking things like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, miso, tempeh, often things that kids are not huge fans of, but sometimes yogurt gets in there. And then also in supplements. And I think it's really important to note that, again, like other supplement products, it needs to be suitable for the child. And with probiotics, it's a really difficult area to study. Saying the word probiotic is like saying the word canine in reference to a dog. Think how many different dog breeds there are, the characteristics they display in their appearance and the jobs they like to do, their temperaments, and how they interact with people is so variable. And that's like the bacteria in these probiotics. Everyone's gut health is so different, and the bacteria themselves in the probiotics are so different. So what works for one child is very difficult to predict. There is a lot of research happening in that space, and there's a really good website that I use as a reference called ISAP. So basically, if someone is coming to me saying that they have a particular reason they're thinking about a probiotic, for example, the child might have just had antibiotics and got diarrhea from it. So then we look up, there's some really good research to show that certain strains of probiotics can be beneficial in restoring the gut microbiome, so that healthy gut health, after antibiotics. And so we'll find the specific strain for the child to support the reason why they want it. Probiotics are quite expensive, and in another approach is if you're thinking about trialing it, having a look what's written on the package, making sure it's suitable for kids, and they might have a particular reason they recommend this particular strain. And so trialing it until it runs out, and then stopping it and seeing if there's any change when there was the probiotic happening versus not. Because they are expensive. So we don't want to just keep buying them if it's not having any impact, and it's a very difficult thing to understand or study because it is so individual. And then we bring us to the health. They're not going to eat any of those foods that have been recommended. I think understanding the why behind this is really important. Sometimes it can be sensory. So eating involves all of our senses. So if you think about the experience when you're sitting at the table eating something, there's a lot of sound going on. There's the crunch that's happening, the clanging of the cutlery on the plate, different textures and slurping. The taste as well, obviously. Some kids are quite what we call super tasters, so they can taste things quite strongly, and that can impact how they interpret the taste of foods and their preferences. The way things look is a sense and an experience for a lot of kids. And so quite often we'll say that the eyes act like guards. So the guards are up. When we see a familiar food, those guards can come down, and it's okay, it's going to be the same. But if the food looks a little bit different, then those guards can stay up and the kids can be a little bit wary, and it's working out how we support that as well. The way things feel and the way things smell. So there's a lot going on. There are also other senses involved in the eating experience. For example, interoception, which is understanding the body's feelings and internal cues. So, for example, feelings of fullness or hunger, and how we interpret that, or the need to go to the toilet. So that can impact a child's eating journey as well. I think when we see sensory processing differences, then it's often associated with selective eating, and we'll see predictable foods that deliver the same sensory experience each time. So we might see a small food range, your typical beige looking diet, so bread, pasta, crackers, and packaged foods. One of the things that I'm often working with families to support is minimizing stress at mealtimes. So stress can be triggered by so many things, and can be the sensory experience for the child, as well as the eating environment around it, the food itself, and they can go into fight or flight mode. So what I mean by that is if you think of how you would feel if there was a spider running across your hand, and then you get that shock mode and you're ready to run or fight. And the blood, I think, in our body is going to our muscles, and it's preparing us for that, moving away from our digestive system, and we lose our appetite. And so for some kids, they experience that when they may see a different food or have sort of pressures around eating. And so there's a really well-known picky eating dietitian and speech pathologist who has said that if a child has butterflies in her stomach, there's no room for food. And so we do a lot of work to support the eating experience and reducing that mealtime stress so that we can be in that rest and digest mode. But how we get there is really challenging and very individual for each child. We want to understand and fill the gaps like we've talked about, swapping out brands. I always recommend being transparent. So sometimes if we sneak or hide food, then kids can become suspicious and get a shock and then lose their preferred food because something was hidden in it, and lose that trust. So it's really important to be transparent and keep the trust with food. We may use supplements, and it's often a process, but once we've got to that nutritional adequacy using preferred foods or supplements, then once the stress, it helps to relieve the stress for the whole family. And that's where we may move on to thinking about variety and boosting long-term variety. And again, that's individual, but we'll look at strategies around rotating preferred foods to keep their current range that they already have, and then gradually stretching their food preferences at a pace that's guided by the child. and boosting the nutrition in home prepared goods. And that's where those supplement powders can be really useful. If the child, say, is accepting a homemade muffin, then what can we add to that to boost the nutrition in it? And it's always important to seek help if you're seeing certain red flags with selective eating, such as only eating a particular color, texture, or temperature of foods, avoiding whole food groups, and bringing it back to that photo I had earlier of the different food groups. If we're missing whole ones, then it's hard to meet the needs for particular nutrients, and we need to top those up. If the child's having really extreme reactions to food or unfamiliar food, such as gagging or vomiting, meltdowns, they're getting into that fight or flight mode. We need to be able to support them in that space. Or if they're eating, say, only one brand of food, that can indicate that there may be a sensory component to their selective eating, but we need to do the full assessment to understand the why behind their feeding. And so that brings this to a close, and I'd just like to let you know the services that I provide in my private clinic. So I was at the Children's Hospital for most of my career, but recently have opened privately, and I support a wide range of dietitian services, including NDIS. So we do oral nutrition support. So that can be registering people for home enteral nutrition, so supplements delivered to your door, and tailoring it to the child. I'm skilled in tube feeding, blenderized feeds, can write NDIS reports, and support neurodivergent children with limited food range. So a lot of selective eating support. I can help with growth, gut health or the gut microbiome, constipation, those types of things, as well as a wide range of other conditions, pediatric feeding disorders, ARFID, ADHD, supporting appetite and growth on medications, and nutritional deficiencies, allergies, etc. And so I'd like to hand it back to Kelly now, just to see if there are any questions that we need to go through.
Thank you, Ash. That was very comprehensive. In fact, the questions I had, I think you've answered every one of them. So I did just, while I was sitting there thinking, though, there's probably participants out there at the moment who are sort of sitting there thinking, well, at what point do I need to really sort of make that call of I need to see a dietitian? Like, what are the things that would stand out to a parent to go, oh, this really isn't working, and perhaps it's time I sought some professional help with this?
Yeah, sure. I think there are quite a lot of factors at play. If we're seeing high levels of stress around feeding kids, that's a really big indicator that we need some extra support. If there's concerns around the child's growth, and those growth charts are something that you do have access to in blue books, or if you're in other states, it might be a red book or different infant books, or even online, you can look them up and plot your child's growth history. And if you see that it's not sort of tracking along the same line of where it should be, or you can ask your GP for support in doing that, then that's when we can provide some additional support there. And bringing it back to those other red flags. So if they're missing out on key food groups, or you're not sure if a blenderized feed is balanced, if you just want reassurance, so to do a food diary and work out what vitamins and minerals and everything that are going in, then they can all be reasons to reach out for support.
And I think even just the tips about, changing the brand and the type of bread that you use and things like that, just to put those little bit of extra nutrients into a child's diet, especially when we've all got, I think, one of those children that only like to eat sandwiches some days and don't like to put a lot of vegetables or things into the mix. So it's great to know that there's those little changes that you can make that hopefully aren't too much of a stress for the child when they see that change has been made, because hopefully the texture and everything like that is still the same, and the coloring, and that may just be a little bit of a change in size, that we can actually implement those changes and help to add in those extra vitamins or a little bit more nutrition where it's needed.
Yeah, and I think as a mum, something I'm really passionate about is listening to families and understanding where they're at. Because the last thing that I want to do as a practitioner is add more jobs to the mental load and the jobs. So I like to break it down into what I call nutrition bricks. And basically, it's these tiny little changes that we add and they add up over time. They need to be achievable in the lifestyle, not adding too much to the mental load, and something that the child can accept. And that's what gets us to the roof, which is our goals. And so the goal might be variety for a child or nutritional adequacy, but it's these little bricks that we just have to do tiny little changes over time that gets us there.
No, that's amazing. The simpler the better sometimes because yeah,
Yes,
when we're busy
definitely.
mums and it's like, oh, that's just another thing on the plate. And you just want your child to eat something and just to be happy and know that they're full when they go to bed and
Yeah.
that everything digestively is going to work well as well.
Yeah, and I think something that has evolved for me, particularly since COVID, is the use of telehealth. And so we were forced, even in the hospital system, to be doing that. And now in private practice, it's something that the majority of families I see like. And so if we can have sort of growth measurements available, then quite often it is really suitable to do sessions over telehealth. We may alternate with when the child's present versus when they're not. And I think these things really help with convenience and implementing strategies. Because we're not providing a hands-on service like what a physio may do, telehealth is a really suitable option and more achievable usually, particularly if the child is already having multiple therapies and all the things just pile up. So if we can do like a quick lunch break telehealth on a work day or something like that, we can make it convenient and build on these nutrition bricks in a way that works for the family.
No, that's fantastic, especially as you want to be transparent with your child, but sometimes having those conversations with a professional, they're not always appropriate for little ears to hear, and you don't want to make them feel any more anxious about their eating than what they already are. So no, that sounds like an amazing way to combat that as well.
Definitely. We call it parent coaching style, and we do use that a lot in sessions. I think we quite often can have more success that way when we're not hiding that anxiety by coming in to the dietitian, which
And I
in
think
itself can be scary for some kids.
exactly. And I think too, because food is such a family thing, it's something you do as a family. So if you can try and um, implement those things across the whole family in some ways, it certainly does reduce that stress on the parent and also the stress on the rest of the family as well. That we're all sort of working together with this, not just one particular person trying to fix this at the end of the day.
Definitely, yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'd like to extend my thanks to Ash for sharing her valuable insights and expertise today. Your presentation was both enlightening and engaging, so thank you so much. I'd also like to thank all our participants for their attention. Um, I hope everybody has got something out of today's session. I'm sure they have. I know I've been jotting down notes as I go and making little notes here and there of things that I can do for my family. So thank you so much. In the coming days, all registered participants will receive an email which contains a link to today's session recording, the presentation slides, some additional resources. I will actually I've put it into the chat at the moment, but Ash's website, Nourish Paediatrics, she mentioned her blog there as well. And if you haven't already, I know that she also has a Facebook page that you can watch. She'll quite often put up little videos and things, which I've found really interesting as well. And we'll also have the contact details for Ash in the email that is sent, along with other ways to connect with Belongside families and continue the conversation. I've dropped our survey in the chat, so please take a moment or two just to fill it in and give us some feedback about today. We also encourage you to stay connected with us. So follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Belongside Families. Subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. And before you go, I will highlight some important events coming up at Belongside. So next week we have the Safe and Skilled Support Workers webinar, which was with Bree. So it will talk about what makes a great support worker and how do we know you can trust them. So the right support can make all the difference, but finding skilled and reliable, valued, aligned workers isn't always easy. So in this webinar, we'll introduce you to Support Workers Association of Australia, known as SWA, an organisation working to raise the standard of support through advocacy, accountability and training. And I will also put the link to that webinar in the chat if you are interested in joining. The other thing you may be interested in is our All About Me workshop. So our children are so much more than their diagnosis or their report. So how do we help others to see and support them in a way that they truly deserve? So in our interactive workshop, you will create a strengths-based introduction for your child, capturing who they are, what they love and what motivates them and helps them to thrive. So that can be great for when you're working with a new therapist or working with school, so that they get the most out of their experience with these new people that are coming into their lives. So I've also put the link for that one in. And I'll also let you know we have a series coming up, our webinar series for genetics, and that will also be with Bree. So it's over 4 weeks, and along with parents and seasoned professionals in the field, we'll explore the prospect of genetic testing, what happens when the results come in, navigating daily life with a genetic diagnosis, as well as your rights, participating in research and looking forward for the future. So this is a collaboration with Genetic Alliance Australia and will be starting in September, and registrations will be open soon on our website. And finally, a new thing that we are starting is a Facebook page for our high medical needs families. So this will be a great way for families to connect when the load is heavy, and also ask questions or share helpful tips about navigating hospitalisation and the healthcare system. So details will be on our website shortly, and I will also provide some details in the resource email when that comes out in the next few days. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Ash. It has been amazing.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you all at future Belongside events. So I hope you all have a wonderful day and manage to stay dry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.